Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe. I am the Director of Academic Success at Nectar, and we're super excited to be here today. Welcome to today's mini lesson on how to enhance your teaching through prompting. So, in this session, I'm going to do a mini lesson on how we can explore effective prompting to help you improve your teaching practices and your materials. So, whether you're an educator or a student or neither, you can utilize these tips to enhance your communication skills and interactions with AI. So, we're going to discuss how AI can assist you in generating content and reducing the workload involved in creating instructional materials. So, before we do that, let's first start by understanding what is a prompt. A prompt is a question or a statement designed to elicit a response. It can be a versatile tool to guide conversations, gather information, and encourage deeper thinking. Prompts can be open ended, inviting detailed responses, or close ended, seeking very specific responses. Today, we're going to be focusing on an open ended prompt, specifically on how you can use prompting with AI to generate instructional content. By utilizing prompting, you can streamline the content creation process, making it much more efficient and less time consuming. This approach will allow you to quickly generate high quality materials, freeing up more time for other important aspects of teaching and learning. So, when it comes to effective prompting, there are three key tips. Tip number one is to define your objective. Start by clearly stating what you want to achieve with your prompt. Having a really well defined objective will guide the AI in generating responses that align with your goals. Tip number two, provide detailed context. Include any relevant information that will help the AI understand the task. Use precise language to avoid ambiguity, ensuring that the AI has all the necessary details to generate accurate and relevant content. Tip number three, iterate and refine. Continuously refine your prompts by adding details and context until you've achieved your desired objective. Don't hesitate to experiment with different phrasings and structures to improve the quality of the output. With these tips in mind, I'm now going to switch over to Nectar AI to do a little demonstration on how you can apply these tips in practice. All right. So what you're all looking at is the Nectar AI interface, and we're going to be talking to a general help assistant. So what we mean by a general help assistant, and I'll actually show you these in our assistant settings. This assistant's knowledge is currently opened up to the LLM, so it's set at general knowledge, which means it has all the information in the LLM, which in this case right now is ChatGPT 4.0. Also, the assistant prompt is completely blank, allowing us to essentially work with an open-ended assistant. So now we're going to come back to the assistant and start with our first tip, which is clearly defining the objective. So for today's demonstration, I'm going to ask the assistant to help me design a performance task. So as you can see, the AI is already able to generate some steps and considerations for me to consider when it comes to designing a performance task. So now let's think about tip number two, provide detailed context. So I'm actually going to go through each of these steps in consideration and provide the assistant with more information on what I would like from this performance task. So for example, it says determine what skill or knowledge you want to assess. I want So the topic that we're going to evaluate in this performance task is multi-digit multiplication. And so the audience for this performance task is going to be fifth grade students. Um, and it says tailor the task to appropriate and challenging for the intended audience. Now, I also want this performance task to just be engaging as well. I want this task. Next, it tells me to choose a real world context. I don't really necessarily care exactly what the context is, but I want it to be relevant to my students. And then lastly, it's going to design the task and then determine the assessment criteria. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's see, just with this context, what it's able to generate. All right. So with just the information I provided, it gives me a draft of a performance task, the Great School Fair Challenge. And so the scenario here is that students are going to be setting up a school fair where they're going to be managing different booths. Here breaks down the task description. So students will work in small groups to choose a booth to manage. Options can include a snack booth, a game booth, or craft booth. Now, I actually want the assistant to actually generate all of the information for each of these booths. So I can actually ask the assistant to generate that information for me. So now I can actually just copy and paste this information so that I have 3 different options that my students can choose from when it comes to which booth they want to set up. I'm going to come back to my initial performance task. And in the next step, it's asking students to do item calculation. So as students are probably going to be completing this performance task, they're going to need to document all of this information on some type of worksheet. So I'm actually going to ask the assistant to create that as well. So instead of having to create that worksheet on my own, I can ask the assistant to generate that information for me. And so it took all of the pricings from the initial plan and embedded it into a worksheet that I can hopefully copy and paste into my assignment directions. So I'm going to come back up now to the initial plan, all the way at the top. So we have the booth selection, we have a place for students to do their calculations and where they're going to determine their initial budget. The last piece of this performance task is that students are going to need to do a presentation. Now, I know for a fact that my 5th grade students are going to need a lot more context when it comes to what a presentation should look like. So we can ask the assistant to generate that information for us. So I'm going to ask the assistant to generate this information for me, and I'm going to give it some parameters because I want the presentation to be focused on Google Slides, and I want to give the students the expectation that they have to do a minimum of 5 slides. So it generates a set of directions that now my students can follow, for example, for slide 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, sometimes as an accommodation, I might also want to give my students a template. So I can ask the assistant. So instead of having to create the entire presentation myself, now I can actually use this slide template and copy it and place it into Google Slides. And now I have a template that all of my students can follow when working on this presentation. So just to summarize, we have the task. We have all the options for booths for students to choose from. We have a worksheet for them to document on. We even have directions for the presentation that they're going to complete. The last thing that we're missing here is how are we going to evaluate this performance task? So since I teach in elementary school, most of my students are familiar with the 1 through 5 scale. So I'm going to ask the assistant to help me generate a rubric that is out of 50 points using the 1 through 4 scale. And this is designed to be student facing so that students have a little bit more clarity there. Now, actually, now that I'm looking at it, this looks actually more instructional facing. So maybe this is going to be for me when I'm grading. I can ask them to make a version for my students. So it's able to take my initial rubric and translate it into student facing language. And now I have a rubric that I can post in front of my class. So with everything that we've discussed, now we can ask the assistant if they can compile all this information for us. Excuse my little spelling error there. And so now it's going to take all of the things that's created. So the main objective is plan and manage a booth for the school fair using multi-digit multiplication skills. You'll work in groups to calculate the items, stay within the budget, and then present your plan using Google Slides. It includes the booth options it initially presented, the 3 different types. It includes the worksheet for students to follow along with. And then it also includes the Google Slide template that students can use for their presentation. And then lastly, students can follow this rubric to review their work. So this was my quick little mini lesson on how you can essentially use prompting to generate content. So just to quickly revisit the tips that we did, number 1 is to clearly define your objective. In this case, it was to define a performance task. Number 2 is to provide detailed context. So for everything I need created, all of the areas about my students, how I wanted to create, what type of information I needed to include, I was able to share all of that with my AI assistant, and it was able to take in all of that information and continue to refine the materials to my expectations. And then lastly, tip number 3 is to refine and iterate. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of a process of a back and forth to really get the assistant to generate the high quality information that you're interested in. So going back and forth with the assistant to ask more questions, provide more details until you get to your desired result is just a part of the process. All right. So that was my quick little mini lesson. If you're interested in learning more about AI and connecting with other educators around AI and education, we have a few exciting events to share with you. The first one is the AI in Action Summit. Go ahead and take a moment to just scan that QR code if you're interested in learning more. We are actively, Nectar as in we, are partnering with LA Pacific University to hold this event. So we're super excited about it. This is the one part. The second piece to this event is the AI case competition. This is designed for students to get an opportunity to practice using Nectar AI assistants to solve business solutions. So again, go ahead and take a moment to scan that QR code if you're interested in learning more about that AI competition. And of course, if you ever have any questions, please reach out to Nectar or LAPU, and we're more than happy to support you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my mini lesson today, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.